The candles had burned halfway down their silver holders when I finally accepted the truth. No one was coming. I stood in my dining room, wearing the emerald dress I'd bought specifically for this night, staring at 12 empty chairs arranged around my grandmother's antique mahogany table. The prime rib sat cooling in its herb crust, the champagne had lost its chill, and the engagement cake I'd spent 3 days perfecting remained untouched on the sideboard. 27 years old, and I'd never felt more alone. Marcus squeezed my shoulder, his calloused hands gentle against my bare skin. Maybe there was an accident, he whispered, though we both knew better. Traffic or stop. The word came out sharper than I intended. My fiancé of 3 months didn't deserve my anger, but I had nowhere else to put it. Just stop making excuses for them. I'd sent the invitations 6 weeks ago, called each family member personally to confirm. My mother Elena had seemed excited, promising to bring her famous tiramisu. My father David said he'd drive down from Portland despite his busy medical practice. My uncle Richard and Aunt Martha confirmed with enthusiasm. Even my cousins Jake and Riley had promised to attend, joking about the open bar I'd mentioned. Every single person in my family had confirmed. Every single person had lied. The dining room felt suffocating with its warm lighting and carefully arranged flowers, white roses and baby's breath, the same combination I'd chosen for my wedding bouquet. I'd spent weeks planning every detail, from the linen napkins to the playlist of soft jazz humming through the speakers. I'd wanted everything perfect for the night I'd announced my engagement to Marcus Chen, the carpenter who'd rebuilt my kitchen and somehow rebuilt my heart in the process. I should have known, I muttered, walking to the window. The Seattle skyline glittered beyond my Capitol Hill apartment, but the beauty felt mocking. I should have fucking known. Kayla, no, Marcus, look at this. I gestured wildly at the elaborate spread. Look what I did. I actually thought they cared. I thought maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. The history sat heavy between us. Every birthday I'd celebrated alone after age 16, every college graduation they'd missed, every promotion, every achievement, every moment when I'd needed family and found emptiness instead. But this felt different. This felt deliberate. I was reaching for the candles, ready to blow them out and surrender to the tears building behind my eyes, when the front door creaked open. My breath caught. Through the archway, I saw a figure moving slowly through my living room, an elderly woman with silver hair pinned back in a neat bun, her cardigan hanging loose on her diminishing frame. Grandmother Ruth, 93 years old and battling stage 4 lung cancer, shuffled forward with her walker. Grandma? I rushed to her side. What are you doing here? You shouldn't have climbed those stairs. She looked smaller than when I'd last seen her 3 weeks ago, her once bright blue eyes now cloudy with pain medication and something else, determination maybe, or fear. In her trembling hands, she clutched a folded piece of yellow paper, aged and worn at the edges. They don't know anything, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She pressed the note into my palm, her skin papery and cold. 67 years I've kept this secret. 67 years of watching you live someone else's life. My heart hammered against my ribs. What are you talking about? Read it, child. Read it and understand why they stayed away tonight. Why they've always stayed away. With shaking fingers, I unfolded the note. The paper was hospital stationery, dated December 15th, 1996, my birth date. The handwriting belonged to Dr. Margaret Winters, the obstetrician who delivered me, but the words made no sense. Baby A deceased at 11:47 p.m. Baby B survived. Parents Elena and David Morrison requesting baby B be given deceased twins identity. Name change from Sarah to Kayla, approved per family request. Birth certificate amended. Original records sealed. Asterisk. The world tilted. My legs gave out, and Marcus caught me before I hit the floor. I don't understand, I gasped. What does this mean? Grandmother Ruth's eyes filled with tears she'd apparently been holding back for decades. It means you're not Kayla Morrison, sweetheart. It means you're Sarah. And it means the family you've been trying so hard to please, they've been grieving their real daughter for 27 years. The note fluttered to the floor as Marcus helped me into a chair. My hands shook so violently I couldn't hold on to anything. Not the paper, not reality, not the person I thought I was. Grandmother Ruth lowered herself onto the couch with painful slowness, her walker clattering against the coffee table. Tell me, I whispered. Tell me everything. She closed her eyes, as if gathering strength from some deep reservoir I couldn't see. When she opened them again, they held the weight of nearly 7 decades of secrets. Your mother had complications during labor, she began, her voice steady despite its frailty. Twins weren't expected. The ultrasounds had missed it somehow. Baby A came first. Kayla. Beautiful. Perfect. But her cord was wrapped around her neck. She lived for 17 minutes. The room spun around me. Marcus's hand found mine, anchoring me to something solid while my world disintegrated. Baby B, you, came 20 minutes later. Healthy. Crying. Alive. But Elena. Ruth shook her head. Your mother was sedated. Grieving. Not thinking clearly. When Dr. Winters asked about arrangements, Elena made a decision that haunted all of us. She wanted to pretend the dead baby was me, I said, the words tasting like poison. She wanted to raise me as Kayla. She couldn't bear the thought of explaining to everyone that she'd lost a child. The shame, she said, the questions, and looking at you. Ruth's voice broke. You looked so much like her, like the baby she'd lost. Elena convinced herself it would be easier to just switch the names on the paperwork. But that's illegal, Marcus said, his voice tight with anger. You can't just. Dr. Dr. Winters was Elena's college roommate. Ruth interrupted. They made it work. Changed the birth certificate. Sealed the original records. As far as the world knew, Sarah Morrison died that night, and Kayla Morrison lived. I thought of all the times I'd felt like a stranger in my own family. The way conversations would stop when I entered a room. How my parents would sometimes look at me with such sadness, such disappointment, as if I was failing at something I didn't understand. They were waiting for me to become her, I realized. All these years, they've been waiting for me to turn into their dead daughter. Yes, the word came out like a prayer. And when you didn't, when you chose art instead of medicine like your father, when you moved to Seattle instead of staying in their perfect Portland suburb, when you fell in love with a carpenter instead of a lawyer, they pulled further away. The engagement dinner suddenly made terrible sense. This wasn't just about announcing my engagement to Marcus. This was about choosing a life completely different from whatever fantasy they'd built around their lost Kayla. This was me, Sarah, finally becoming someone they couldn't pretend was their real daughter. Why didn't you tell me before? I asked, anger creeping into my voice. 67 years, Grandma. You watched me try to earn love that was never meant for me. Ruth's tears fell freely now. Because I was a coward. Because Elena threatened to cut me off from you completely if I ever told. Because I thought maybe, somehow, love could grow where it hadn't existed before. She reached into her purse with trembling hands. But then the cancer came, and I realized I might die with this secret. And tonight, when Elena called to tell me why the family wouldn't be attending your dinner, she called you. She said they couldn't bear to celebrate Sarah's engagement when they should be mourning Kayla's death. She said seeing you happy, seeing you build a life as someone else, felt like betraying their real daughter's memory. The cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. They'd rather have no relationship with me at all than accept that I wasn't the child they'd lost. There's more, Ruth said quietly. She pulled out a second piece of paper, newer, but still yellowed with age. Hospital records I managed to get from Dr. Winters before she retired, about the night you were born. My hands shook as I took the paper. This one was a medical chart, filled with details I barely understood, but one section made my blood freeze. Note: Baby B shows signs of minor genetic variations consistent with different paternity. Recommend DNA testing if family questions arise. Asterisk. Different paternity? I looked up at Ruth, who was watching me with the saddest expression I'd ever seen. Elena had an affair, she whispered, 6 months before you were born. She never told David, never told anyone except me. But when the babies came, and one died, and the other looked different somehow, Ruth's voice trailed off. I'm not just not Kayla, I said slowly. I'm not even their child. Biologically, no. You're Elena's daughter, but David isn't your father. And the man who is. Ruth met my eyes. He doesn't know you exist. The dining room behind us remained set for a celebration that would never come. The candles had burned down to stubs, wax pooling on my grandmother's antique table, but I barely noticed. Everything I'd believed about myself, about my family, about my entire identity, lay shattered around me like broken glass. Marcus squeezed my hand. What do you want to do? I looked at the woman I'd called grandmother for 27 years, this brave, broken woman who'd finally chosen truth over comfortable lies. Then I thought about my parents. No, Elena and David, sitting in their Portland home, probably relieved that they'd avoided facing the daughter who reminded them daily of their deception. I want to find him, I said. I want to find my real father. Ruth's confession hung in the air like smoke, choking and inescapable. I sat in my emerald dress surrounded by the ruins of my perfect engagement dinner, trying to process that the woman I'd called mother had not only lied about my identity, but had been keeping me from my biological father for 27 years. What was his name? I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. Ruth looked toward the darkened window, as if she could see into the past. James Sullivan. He was a photographer, worked for the Portland Tribune back then. Elena met him during some charity event David couldn't attend, a hospital fundraiser, I think. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my supposed father was saving lives as a surgeon, my real father was capturing them through a camera lens. No wonder I'd always felt drawn to visual art, to seeing the world through a different perspective than David's clinical precision. Is he still alive? Marcus asked gently. He'd been holding my hand for the past hour, anchoring me through each devastating revelation. As far as I know, he left Portland after the affair ended. Elena told him she was staying with her husband. He never knew she was pregnant. Ruth reached into her purse again, pulling out a faded newspaper clipping. I kept this, from when he won some photography award in San Francisco, maybe 10 years ago. I took the clipping with trembling fingers. The photo showed a man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and eyes the same shade of green as mine. The caption read, James Sullivan's exhibition Hidden Truths opens at the Morrison Gallery. Even in the grainy newsprint, I could see the resemblance, the sharp cheekbones, the way he held his head slightly tilted, the intensity in his gaze that people had always commented on in me. Morrison Gallery, I whispered. That's the same name as your adoptive family. Yes, pure coincidence, but it always felt like some kind of sign to me. Ruth's voice was getting weaker, the evening taking its toll on her fragile health. Elena saw that article too. She called me, panicking, worried that somehow he'd found out about you. Marcus leaned forward. Have you thought about what you want to say to him? If we find him? The question made my chest tight. What did you say to a man who'd fathered you without knowing it? How did you explain that his lover had not only hidden her pregnancy, but had raised their child under another another dead baby's name? I don't know, I admitted, but I need to try. I need to understand who I really am. Ruth struggled to her feet, using her walker for support. There's something else, Sarah? She'd started calling me by what she now knew was my real name, and each time it felt like a small rebellion against 27 years of lies. Something about the night you were born that I never told Elena. My stomach clenched. After everything she'd already revealed, what could possibly be worse? The night of the affair, Ruth continued, Elena came to my house afterward. She was drunk, crying, saying she'd made a terrible mistake, but she also said something else. She said James had talked about wanting children, about how his ex-wife had left him because he wanted a family and she didn't. She said he would have been a wonderful father. The words hit me like a physical blow. While I'd spent my childhood trying to earn David's distant affection, somewhere out there was a man who'd actually wanted children, who might have wanted me. She robbed him of that choice, I said, anger building in my chest. She robbed both of us. Yes, Ruth agreed quietly, and I was complicit. I should have told someone, should have found a way to contact him, but Elena was my only daughter, and I was afraid of losing you both. I understood, even through my anger. Ruth had been caught between impossible choices: betray her daughter's secret, or allow her granddaughter to grow up living a lie. In trying to protect everyone, she'd ultimately protected no one. I need to call in sick tomorrow, I told Marcus. I need to start looking for him. We'll look together, he said immediately. I can take time off the construction site. The simple offer made my eyes burn with fresh tears. Here was Marcus, who'd known me for less than a year, offering to help me hunt for a father who didn't know I existed. Meanwhile, the people who'd raised me couldn't even attend a dinner to celebrate my happiness. You don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was firm. Kayla, Sarah, whoever you are, you're the woman I love. We're going to figure this out together. Ruth had been watching our exchange with a small smile. He's a good man, she said to me. James was like that too. Loyal, kind, the type who'd drop everything to help someone he cared about. Tell me more about him, I said. Tell me everything you know. For the next hour, Ruth shared what she remembered about my biological father. James had been passionate about his work, often disappearing for days to capture the perfect shot. He'd grown up in foster care, which explained his desire for a real family. He'd been gentle with Elena, patient with her guilt over the affair. When she'd ended things, he'd accepted her decision without trying to convince her to leave David. He would send her photos sometimes, Ruth said. Beautiful landscapes from his travels. She'd show them to me, then throw them away because she was afraid David would ask questions. I always thought it was such a waste. Those pictures were like love letters. The image of my mother discarding my father's art made me sick. How much of myself had she tried to throw away over the years? How many times had she looked at my sketches, my photography, my creative projects, and seen unwanted reminders of the man she'd betrayed? By the time Ruth left, Marcus insisted on driving her home despite her protests. It was nearly midnight. I stood in my kitchen, mechanically wrapping leftover prime rib while my mind raced with plans. I'd start with the Morrison Gallery in San Francisco. If James had exhibited there recently, they might have contact information. Are you okay? Marcus asked, returning from his drive. I laughed, but it came out sharp and brittle. Am I okay? Marcus, I just found out my entire life is a lie. My name isn't my name. My parents aren't my parents. The father I've been trying to please for 27 years isn't even my father. And somewhere out there is a man who might actually want me as a daughter, but he doesn't know I exist because my mother is a selfish coward who... Marcus pulled me into his arms, cutting off my spiral into hysteria. I buried my face in his chest and let myself break down completely. The tears came in waves. Grief for the childhood I should have had. Rage at the lies I'd been fed. Terror at the uncertain future stretching ahead. We'll find him, Marcus whispered into my hair, and whatever happens, we'll face it together. As I cried in my fiancé's arms, surrounded by the remnants of a celebration no one had attended, I made myself a promise. I was done being Sarah living as Kayla. I was done trying to earn love from people who were grieving someone else. Tomorrow, I would start looking for James Sullivan. Tomorrow, I would begin learning who I really was. I woke up at dawn with Marcus's arm around my waist and the taste of revelation bitter in my mouth. The events of the previous night crashed over me in waves. The empty chairs, Ruth's confession, the hospital records that proved my entire identity was built on lies. I lay still for several minutes, staring at the ceiling and trying to convince myself it had all been a nightmare. But the folded yellow paper on my nightstand proved otherwise. How'd you sleep? Marcus mumbled against my shoulder. I didn't. I turned to face him, noting the dark circles under his eyes that matched my own. Did you? Not really. He brushed a strand of hair from my face. I kept thinking about what you said last night, about finding your biological father. I'd been thinking about it too. James Sullivan, a man who wanted children but never knew he had one. A photographer whose love letters Elena had thrown away to protect her lie. My real father, living somewhere in the world completely unaware of my existence. I called the Morrison Gallery, I said. Left a voicemail at 5 a.m. asking about James Sullivan's exhibition. Probably came across as completely unhinged. Marcus smiled despite everything. You? Unhinged? Never. Very funny. I sat up, wrapping the sheet around myself. I also looked him up online. There's a James Sullivan photography studio in Mendocino, California. Could be him. Could be a lot of James Sullivans. It's a pretty common name. This one specializes in landscape photography. And look, I reached for my phone, pulling up the website I'd been obsessing over since since 3 a.m. Look at his bio. After spending years in Portland journalism, James moved to Northern California to focus on fine art photography. He draws inspiration from the hidden stories in everyday moments. And Marcus studied the screen. Hidden stories, like the hidden story of his daughter. The website featured galleries of stunning landscape photos, rugged coastlines, ancient redwood forests, fog rolling over wine country hills. Each image captured something raw and honest, as if the photographer could see beneath the surface of things. I'd been staring at them for hours, searching for some connection, some proof that this man's artistic vision lived in my DNA. There's no phone number, I said. Just a contact form. I sent a message, but I don't know if my phone rang, making us both jump. Unknown California number. It's him, I whispered, suddenly terrified. Answer it, Marcus urged. I swiped to accept the call with shaking fingers. Hello? Hi, is this Sarah? The voice was deep, warm, with a slight rasp that suggested too much coffee and not enough sleep. I got your message about wanting to discuss something important. You said it was about Portland, about 28 years ago? I'd lied about the timeline in my desperate 3 a.m. email, not wanting to reveal too much too quickly. But hearing his voice, hearing what might be my father's voice, made my throat close up completely. I took a deep breath, Marcus squeezing my hand encouragingly. Mr. Sullivan, this is going to sound insane, but I think you might be my biological father. Silence stretched between us, long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. I'm sorry, he said finally. I think you might have the wrong person. I don't have any children. You had an affair with Elena Morrison in Portland, December 1995. She was married, worked for Portland General Hospital's fundraising committee. The words tumbled out in a rush. She got pregnant but never told you. She had twins, but one died, and she raised me under the dead baby's name. And I just found out last night, and I know how crazy this sounds, but Elena. His voice changed, became smaller somehow. Oh God. Elena Morrison. You remember her? Of course I remember her. He paused, and I heard him take a shaky breath. She told me she couldn't have children, said it was one of the reasons her marriage was struggling. Are you telling me she lied about that too? The pain in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just about me. He'd been deceived as well, betrayed by a woman he'd clearly cared about. She lied about everything, I said. Her name is Sarah, not Kayla. The family I thought was mine has been grieving their dead daughter for 27 years. They didn't even come to my engagement dinner last night because seeing me happy reminds them too much of what they lost. Jesus Christ. He was quiet for a long moment. And you're sure? About the paternity, I mean? I looked at the hospital record Ruth had given me, at the note about genetic variations consistent with different paternity. There are hospital records. And pictures. I look like you. Same eyes. Same. I realized I was crying again. I'm sorry. I know this is a lot to dump on a stranger at 7 in the morning. You're not a stranger, he said softly. If what you're saying is true, you're my daughter. My daughter. He repeated the words as if testing how they felt. What's your name? Your real name? Sarah. Sarah Morrison. Though I guess that's not really my name either, since Morrison was just the name Elena took when she married David. Sarah, he said, and the way he pronounced it sounded like a prayer. I had a sister named Sarah. She died when she was little. The coincidence felt like another cosmic joke, another layer of the elaborate deception that had defined my life. Elena had given me the name of a dead child, not knowing she was also giving me the name of my father's dead sister. I'd like to meet you, James said, if you're willing. I live in Mendocino now, but I could drive up to Seattle, or we could meet somewhere in between. I want to meet you too, I interrupted, more than anything. But first, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Of course. Did you love her, Elena? The question hung between us, loaded with 27 years of abandonment and lies. If he said yes, if he admitted he'd loved the woman who'd stolen his chance at fatherhood, I wasn't sure I could handle it. I thought I did, he said finally. But looking back, I think I was in love with the idea of her, the version of herself she presented to me. A woman trapped in a loveless marriage, struggling with infertility, looking for someone who understood her loneliness. He laughed bitterly. Turns out she was just a very good liar. She's still lying, I said. To this day, she and David, her husband, they've built their entire lives around mourning a daughter who died and pretending I'm her ghost. That's not fair to you, or to their daughter's memory. No, it's not. I wiped my eyes, feeling Marcus's steady presence beside me. James? Can I call you James? I don't know what else to. James is perfect. I don't expect you to call me Dad or anything like that. I haven't earned it. The simple acknowledgement made my chest ache. David had never once admitted he hadn't earned my love. He just acted like I was defective for not giving it freely. I want to drive down to meet you, I said. This weekend, if that works. I need to see you in person. Need to know if this is real. It's real, he said quietly. Sarah, I want you to know. If I'd known about you, if Elena had told me, I would have moved mountains to be in your life. I've always wanted children. It's one of the reasons my marriage ended. She knew that. Elena knew that, and she kept us apart anyway. Then she's a fool, he said fiercely, because you sound like an incredible young woman, and she's missed out on 27 years of knowing you. I closed my eyes, letting his words wash over me. Here was a man who'd known me for 10 minutes, and was already defending me more passionately than David ever had. I'll send you my address, James continued. And Sarah, bring your fiancé if you want. I'd like to meet the man who makes you happy enough to have an engagement dinner. After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence while Marcus rubbed circles on my back. How do you feel? He asked. asked, terrified, hopeful, angry, like I might throw up. I looked at him, this patient, wonderful man who'd agreed to love me before he knew how complicated that love would be. Are you sure you want to be part of this mess? Marcus kissed my forehead, soft and reassuring. Sarah Morrison, or whatever your last name turns out to be, you're not a mess. You're a woman who was lied to, who deserves the truth, who deserves a father who actually wants her. And yes, I'm absolutely sure I want to be part of your life. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I called in sick to work with a completely honest excuse. I just found out my entire identity is a lie, and I need to go meet my biological father was definitely not something you heard every day in the corporate world. As we packed for the drive to Mendocino, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope I'd felt before every family gathering, praying this time would be different, but real hope. The kind that came from knowing someone actually wanted to meet you. For the first time in my life, I was going to meet a parent who'd chosen me before he even knew my name. The drive to Mendocino stretched out before us like a question mark. 500 miles of uncertainty on Highway 101. Marcus had insisted on driving, claiming I was too emotionally fragile to handle the winding coastal roads, and he was probably right. My hands hadn't stopped shaking since James's phone call 3 days ago. You're thinking too loud, Marcus said, glancing at me from behind the wheel. We'd been on the road for 2 hours, and I'd barely spoken since we left Seattle. I keep wondering what I'm going to say to him. I stared out the window at the Oregon forest blurring past. Hi, I'm the daughter you never knew existed, and by the way, my entire family thinks I'm someone else. Want to grab coffee? Marcus reached over and took my hand. You'll figure it out when you see him. But I could hear something strained in his voice, a tension that hadn't been there when we'd first planned this trip. For the past 3 days, he'd been supportive, helpful, encouraging, everything a good fiancé should be. But there were moments when I caught him looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, like he was seeing a stranger. Are you having second thoughts? I asked suddenly. About us, I mean. About marrying someone who doesn't even know her own name. Marcus's grip tightened on the steering wheel. That's not what I'm worried about. Then what? He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured in a way that made my stomach clench. I knew, he said. The words hit me like cold water. What do you mean you knew? Not everything. Not about the twins or the affair or any of that. But he pulled over at the next rest stop, parking under a canopy of towering pines. When he turned to face me, his eyes were full of guilt. I knew something was off with your family. Off how? Marcus ran his hands through his dark hair. A gesture I'd learned meant he was struggling with something difficult. Remember when we first started dating? When you invited me to your cousin's wedding in Portland? I remembered. It had been our 3rd official date, and I'd impulsively asked him to be my +1, desperate to not show up alone to another family event. You said you couldn't make it. Something about a work deadline. I lied. The admission came out flat. Matter of fact. I went to Portland that weekend, but I didn't go to the wedding. I went to your parents' neighborhood and I watched. The rest stop seemed to spin around me. You spied on my family? I was worried about you. The words burst out of him. Kayla, you would get so anxious before every family gathering. You'd spend weeks obsessing over what to wear, what to say, how to act. You'd come back from visits with them looking like you'd been hollowed out. And when you talked about them, it never sounded like love. It sounded like desperation. I thought about all those visits home, the careful way I'd curated my appearance, my achievements, my very personality to try to earn their approval. Marcus had been there for the aftermath, the crying, the self-doubt, the way I'd pick apart every interaction looking for signs that they were finally proud of me. So you decided to investigate them. I decided to see what they were really like when you weren't around. So I drove to their house and parked across the street during Sunday dinner. My parents hosted family dinner every week, a tradition I was rarely invited to despite living only 3 hours away. They claimed it was because I was so busy with my city life, but I'd always suspected the real reason was that my presence made everyone uncomfortable. What did you see? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Marcus closed his eyes, as if the memory was painful. They looked happy. All of them. Your parents, your uncle and aunt, your cousins. They were laughing, talking, completely relaxed in a way I'd never seen them when you described family gatherings. And there were pictures everywhere, Kayla. Pictures of family trips, graduations, holidays, dozens of them. That's normal. Families have pictures. Not of you. His voice was gentle but firm. I spent 20 minutes looking through the windows with binoculars. Yes, I brought binoculars. I'm not proud of it, and I didn't see a single photo of you anywhere. Not on the mantle, not on the fridge, not on the walls. It was like you'd been erased from their family history. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I'd noticed the lack of photos during my visits, but I'd told myself they just weren't sentimental people. The truth was so much worse. They'd actively removed me from their visual narrative. Why didn't you tell me? What was I supposed to say? Hey honey, I stalked your family and they seem to hate you? You were already struggling with your relationship with them. I didn't want to make it worse, so you decided to lie instead. I decided to support you, to be there when you needed someone after another disappointing family visit, to love you enough for all of them. Marcus reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I was trying to protect you by keeping secrets, by making decisions about what I could or couldn't handle. Yes, the admission came out fierce, desperate, because I love you, and I could see how much they were hurting you, and I didn't know how to fix it without destroying you completely. I stared stared at him, this man I'd thought I knew completely. We'd been together for almost a year, engaged for 3 months, and he'd been carrying this secret the entire time. Just like Elena, just like Ruth, just like everyone else in my life apparently. What else haven't you told me? I asked. Nothing. I swear to you, that's the only thing. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes pleading. But there's something else. Something I realized after your grandmother told us about the twins. My heart sank. What now? The engagement ring. He gestured to the vintage diamond on my finger, a family heirloom I'd been so proud to wear. When I asked your father for permission to marry you, he gave me this ring and said it had belonged to your grandmother. But when Ruth saw it the other night, the look on her face, I looked down at the ring, suddenly seeing it differently. It wasn't meant for me. I think it was meant for Kayla, the real Kayla, and when she died they couldn't bear to bury it with her, but they also couldn't give it to you because... Marcus's voice trailed off. Because I'm not her. The ring felt heavy on my finger, like it was weighing down my entire hand. I've been wearing a dead girl's engagement ring. I'm sorry. I should have realized. How could you have realized? You didn't know about the twins any more than I did. I twisted the ring, but it wouldn't come off easily. It had been sized for Kayla's finger, not mine, and I'd had to have it enlarged. Even the ring had been trying to tell me I didn't belong. We sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the wind through the pine trees and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. I felt like I was seeing Marcus clearly for the first time, not just the supportive, loving carpenter who'd won my heart, but a man who'd made difficult choices to protect me from truths he thought I couldn't handle. Are you angry? He asked finally. I don't know what I am anymore. I looked at my hands, at the ring that didn't belong to me, at the engagement photos we'd taken just 2 weeks ago when I still thought I knew who I was. I understand why you did it. I do. But Marcus, I need you to promise me something. Anything. No more secrets. No more protecting me from things you think will hurt. I've spent 27 years living someone else's life because people decided what I could and couldn't handle. I can't do that with you too. Marcus nodded, his relief visible. I promise. Complete honesty from now on. Good, because there's something I need to tell you too. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what might be our last conversation as an engaged couple. I don't know if I can marry you. His face went pale. Because of the family stuff? Because of finding out about your father? Because I don't know who I am. The words came out in a rush. 3 days ago, I was Kayla Morrison, disappointing daughter trying to earn her family's love. Today I'm Sarah. Sullivan? Maybe? Someone with a different father, a different history, a different everything. And you fell in love with Kayla. You proposed to Kayla. But what if Sarah is someone completely different? What if you don't like who I turn out to be when I stop trying to be someone else? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the forest. When he looked back at me, his expression was soft but determined. Do you remember our second date? He asked. When we went to that terrible Thai restaurant and got food poisoning. How could I forget? We spent the entire next day alternating between your bathroom and mine. And what did you say to me while we were both lying on my kitchen floor, groaning about never eating pad thai again? I thought back to that ridiculous day when we'd been too sick to be embarrassed about basic human functions and had just taken care of each other. I said I felt like myself with you, like I didn't have to perform or pretend. Exactly. Kayla, Sarah, whoever, the woman I fell in love with is the one who showed up authentically, not the one who was trying to impress her family. You think I didn't notice the difference? You think I couldn't tell when you were being genuine versus when you were putting on a show? But what if? There is no what if. Marcus took my hands in both of his. I'm not in love with a name or a family history or a role you were forced to play. I'm in love with the woman who cries at dog videos and burns dinner when she gets distracted sketching. The woman who spends her Saturdays volunteering at the animal shelter and her Sundays reorganizing her art supplies. The woman who is brave enough to drive 500 miles to meet a father she's never known because she refuses to keep living a lie. I felt tears building behind my eyes again. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. You're you, regardless of what name you use or whose DNA you carry. The rest is just details we'll figure out together. He paused, studying my face. But if you need time, if you need to call off the engagement until you're sure of who you are, I'll understand. I'll wait. The offer was so generous, so completely him, that it broke something loose in my chest. This was the difference between Marcus and everyone else in my life. He was willing to love me without conditions, even if it meant sacrificing his own wants. I don't want to call off the engagement, I said. But I might want to change my name on the marriage certificate. Marcus smiled for the first time since we'd started this conversation. I can live with that, though we might want to figure out what your legal name actually is before we file the paperwork. I laughed despite everything. God, what a mess. I don't even know what to put on my business cards anymore. We'll figure it out, all of it. Marcus started the car again, pulling back onto the highway. But first, let's go meet your father, your real father. As we drove toward Mendocino and the man who might finally give me answers, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in days, I wasn't just running from lies. I was running toward truth. truth, and I had Marcus beside me. Secrets finally cleared between us, ready to face whatever we found together. The ring still felt strange on my finger, but I decided to leave it there for now. Not because it belonged to me, but because it didn't. It was a reminder of everything I was choosing to leave behind. The desperate need for approval, the willingness to live someone else's life, the fear of being authentically myself. When we got to Mendocino, I would meet James Sullivan as Sarah, whoever she turned out to be. And maybe, finally, I would find a parent who wanted to know me as I really was. James Sullivan's house sat perched on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, a weathered cedar structure that seemed to grow naturally from the coastal landscape. As Marcus and I climbed the gravel path to his front door, I could see why a photographer would choose this place. The light was extraordinary, golden, and soft, despite the late afternoon hour. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely knock. The door opened before my knuckles made contact, and I found myself face to face with my father for the first time. The newspaper photo hadn't done him justice. He was taller than I'd expected, maybe 6'2", with the same green eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. But it was more than that. The way he held his shoulders, the slight tilt of his head, the careful way he studied my face. It was like looking at a masculine version of myself in 30 years. "Sarah," he said softly, as if testing the name. "God, you look just like my sister." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. This man was a stranger, but somehow he felt more familiar than the people who'd raised me. "I'm sorry," I managed finally. "I don't know what to say." "That's okay. Neither do I." James stepped back, gesturing us inside. "You must be Marcus. Thank you for bringing her." Marcus shook his hand, and I caught the moment of assessment that passed between them. The older man evaluating the younger one, the protective instinct I'd never seen from David. "Come in, please." I made coffee, though I'm not sure that was smart. I'm already nervous enough to jump out of my skin. The inside of his house was exactly what I'd expected. Clean lines, natural materials, and photography everywhere. Not just his own work, but pieces by other artists. A careful curation that spoke to someone who understood visual storytelling. It felt like home in a way my actual childhood home never had. "These are incredible," I said, stopping in front of a series of black and white portraits. "Did you take these?" "Last year. It's a project about foster kids aging out of the system." James moved to stand beside me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something woody and familiar that made my chest ache. "I was in foster care until I was 18, never got adopted." The revelation hit me like a puzzle piece clicking into place. No wonder he'd wanted children with Elena. No wonder the idea of family had been so important to him. "I never knew that," I said, "about foster care. Elena wouldn't have told you." I don't think she wanted to acknowledge that part of my life. It didn't fit with her fantasy of having an affair with some mysterious, romantic photographer. There was bitterness in his voice that hadn't been there on the phone. She liked the idea of me better than the reality. We settled in his living room, and an awkward silence fell over us. "How did you begin a conversation like this? Where did you start when you were 27 years too late? Tell me about your life," James said finally. "Your childhood, your work, everything. I want to know who you became." So I told him. About growing up feeling like I was constantly failing some test I didn't understand. About choosing art over pre-med and watching David's disappointment settle like a permanent shadow over our relationship. About moving to Seattle and finding success as a freelance graphic designer. About the apartment I decorated with my own paintings. About the animal shelter where I volunteered. As I talked, James listened with an intensity that was foreign to me. He asked questions, real questions about my thoughts, my motivations, my dreams. When I mentioned my photography hobby, his eyes lit up. "Show me," he said immediately. "Do you have any photos with you?" I pulled out my phone, scrolling through recent shots. Mostly nature photography, the same subjects that drew him, I realized. Landscapes, details of moss and bark and stone, the way light fell through Seattle's perpetual cloud. "These are good," he said, and I could hear that he meant it. "You have an eye for composition and light. Look at this one." He pointed to a photo I'd taken in Discovery Park. Morning sun filtered through old-growth trees. "You understand how light can tell a story." David never understood why I wanted to take pictures, I said quietly. He said it was a hobby, not a career. David's an idiot. The words came out sharp, protective. Photography isn't just a career. It's a way of seeing the world, and you see it beautifully. The simple validation made my throat tight. How many times had I shown my work to David, hoping for some sign of pride or interest? How many times had he dismissed my art with polite but distant encouragement? "I need to ask you something," I said, "and I need you to be honest, even if it hurts." James nodded. "Of course. Do you wish Elena had told you about me, even if it meant breaking up her marriage?" The question had been eating at me since our first phone call. Part of me needed to know that at least one parent would have chosen me, even if it meant sacrificing everything else. James was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the ocean through his picture window. When he looked back at me, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Sarah, if Elena had told me she was pregnant, I would have moved to Portland that day. I would have gotten whatever job I could find, would have begged her to give me a chance to be a real father to you." His voice cracked slightly. "I grew up without parents, without anyone who was supposed to love me unconditionally. The idea that I had a daughter somewhere, that I missed your first steps, your first words, your first day of school." He trailed off, running his hands through his hair in a gesture that reminded me painfully of Marcus. "I'm sorry," he continued. "I know that's hard to hear when you've spent your whole life with parents who couldn't love you the way you deserved." "They weren't my parents," I said firmly. Elena gave birth to me, but they raised someone else. They raised the ghost of their dead daughter and expected me to disappear into her. That's not fair to anyone, not to you, not to their daughter's memory. No, it's not. I pulled the hospital record from my purse, the one that mentioned different paternity. I brought this. Proof, if you want it, though I think we both know it's not necessary. James took the paper with trembling hands, reading it carefully. Genetic variations consistent with different paternity, he read aloud. God, Elena knew. She knew you weren't David's, and she still... He shook his head. That poor man raised another man's child for 27 years and never knew it. Do you feel bad for him? Don't you? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on my own pain, my own sense of betrayal, that I hadn't considered David's position in all this. He'd been deceived too, in a way. He'd spent nearly 3 decades trying to love a daughter who reminded him daily that his wife had cheated on him, though he didn't consciously know why. I feel bad for everyone, I said finally. For David, for the daughter who died, for Ruth who kept the secret for 67 years. But mostly I feel bad for us, for all the time we lost. We don't have to lose any more time, James said. If you want, if you're interested, we could start over. Get to know each other properly. I'd like that, I said, and meant it. But I need you to understand something. I'm not looking for you to replace David, or to be the perfect father I never had. I'm just looking for someone who wants to know me as I actually am. That's all I want too. James smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Though I have to admit, I'm curious about your fiancé. Marcus, right? How did you two meet? For the next hour, Marcus and I told him about our relationship, how we'd met when he renovated my kitchen, how he'd won me over with his patience and humor, how he'd proposed on the same spot where we'd had our first real conversation. James listened to Marcus with the same intensity he'd shown me, asking about his work, his family, his intentions. It felt like the conversation David should have had with my fiancé. Protective but respectful, interested but not intrusive. Can I ask you something personal? James said to Marcus eventually. Sure. How long have you known that Kayla, Sarah, felt disconnected from her family? Marcus glanced at me, and I nodded. We'd agreed on complete honesty. From the beginning, Marcus admitted, she never felt like herself around them. Like she was playing a role that didn't quite fit. And you loved her anyway. I loved her because of it. Because she was brave enough to be authentic with me even when she couldn't be authentic with them. James smiled approvingly. Good answer. As the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt something settling into place inside me. This wasn't the tearful reunion I'd imagined. There was too much lost time, too much damage for that, but it was real. James was interested in who I actually was, not who he wanted me to be. He asked about my work, my dreams, my fears. He looked at my photography like it mattered. He treated Marcus like a person worth knowing. For the first time in my life, I was sitting with a parent who seemed genuinely glad I existed. I have something for you, James said as we prepared to leave. He disappeared into what looked like his office and returned with a thick photo album. Pictures of your Aunt Sarah and some of your grandparents, my adoptive parents, the Sullivans. I thought you might want to see where you come from. I opened the album with reverent hands, seeing faces that shared my features, expressions that mirrored my own. Here was Sarah Sullivan at age 5, grinning at the camera with my exact smile. Here were Thomas and Mary Sullivan, the couple who'd adopted James when he was 8 and given him a real home. They would have loved you, James said quietly. All of them. You would have fit right into this family. I still can, I said impulsively, if you want me to. I know it's complicated, and we have a lot to figure out, but Sarah, James put his hand on my shoulder, and the gesture felt natural. Right, you're my daughter. Of course I want you in my life. We'll figure out the rest as we go. That night, Marcus and I stayed in a bed and breakfast in town, and I lay awake staring at the ceiling and processing everything that had happened. I had a father who wanted me. I had a biological family history that made sense of who I was. I had a name that belonged to me instead of a dead child, but I also had Elena and David, who'd raised me with whatever broken love they could manage. I had Ruth, who'd kept terrible secrets, but had finally chosen truth. I had Marcus, who'd loved me through all of it. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was walking toward something instead of running away from it. Tomorrow, we would drive back to Seattle, and I would figure out how to be Sarah Sullivan. But tonight, I fell asleep knowing that somewhere in the world was a man who was proud to call me his daughter. I waited 3 days after returning from Mendocino before calling Elena. 3 days of staring at my phone, composing and deleting text messages, practicing conversations that started with accusations and ended with hang-ups. Finally, Marcus took the phone out of my hands and dialed the number himself. Hi, Mrs. Morrison, he said when she answered. It's Marcus. Kayla needs to talk to you. No, she's fine. Yes, right now. He handed me the phone. Be brave. Elena's voice was cautious, confused. Kayla, what's wrong? Marcus sounded very serious. We need to talk, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. In person. Today. I'm in in Portland, honey. You're in Seattle. Can't we just— I know about the twins. The words came out like bullets. I know about James. I know everything. Silence stretched between us. So long I wondered if she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Ruth told you. Ruth saved me. Someone had to. I was pacing my living room now, adrenaline coursing through me. I'm driving down there today. Be home at 4 o'clock. Kayla, wait. My name is Sarah. I hung up and immediately felt sick. 27 years of trying to please this woman, and it had taken me 30 seconds to burn it all down. You okay? Marcus asked from the kitchen, where he was packing sandwiches for the drive. No, but I'm doing it anyway. The 3-hour drive to Portland felt like traveling back in time to a life that no longer fit. As we pulled into the driveway of the house where I'd grown up, the house where no photos of me remained on display, I felt like I was looking at a movie set from someone else's childhood. Elena opened the door before I could knock. She looked older than she had at Christmas, her blonde hair showing gray roots, her usually perfect makeup absent. She was wearing a faded sweater and jeans, as if she'd given up on maintaining appearances. Kayla, she said, then caught herself. I'm sorry, Sarah. You look like James, I finished. I met him. We spent the day together in Mendocino. Elena's face crumpled. Oh God. Are you going to invite us in, or are we having this conversation on the porch? She stepped back, gesturing us into the living room where I'd spent countless uncomfortable family gatherings, but now I could see it differently. The careful arrangement of photos that excluded me, the way the furniture was positioned as if for people who belonged here completely. I'd never belonged here, and now I understood why. Where's David? I asked. At the hospital. He doesn't know you're coming. Elena perched on the edge of the couch like a bird ready to take flight. He doesn't know that you know. Are you planning to tell him? I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. Elena looked at Marcus, who'd remained standing near the doorway. Could we have some privacy? No, I said firmly. Marcus stays. He's going to be my husband, and I'm done with family secrets. Elena flinched at the word husband, as if it physically hurt her. You're really going to marry him? Even now that you know. Know what? That I'm not your dead daughter? That changes nothing about my relationship with Marcus. But you're not. Elena stopped herself, but I could see the words she wanted to say hanging in the air. You're not Kayla. You're not the one who was supposed to get married. Say it, I demanded. Say what you're thinking. This is so hard, Elena whispered, tears starting to flow. You don't understand how hard this is. Then explain it to me. Explain how you justified lying to me for 27 years. Explain how you could look at me every day and see someone else. Explain how you could keep me from my real father. Elena buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. When she looked up, her eyes were red and swollen. I was grieving, she said. When Kayla died, when we lost her, I couldn't think straight. She was so perfect, Sarah. 10 fingers, 10 toes, this beautiful little face. And then she was gone, and you were there, and you looked so much like her. So you decided to pretend I was her. I decided to save you both, Elena said fiercely. You don't know what it was like. The guilt, the shame. I'd had an affair, I'd gotten pregnant, and then one baby lived and one died, and everyone was asking questions about why you looked different from David. Different how? Elena gestured vaguely at my face. Your eyes, your bone structure. You were beautiful, but you weren't David's, and people would have figured it out eventually. So I thought if we could make you Kayla, then no one would question anything. You thought you could make me into someone else. I thought I could save us all from the scandal, from the questions, from having to explain that my daughter died, and my husband's daughter lived, but she wasn't really his daughter. Elena was crying harder now. I was 25 years old, Sarah. I was grieving and terrified, and I made a terrible decision. You made a dozen terrible decisions. You falsified documents. You kept me from James. You spent 27 years treating me like I was defective because I couldn't become your dead daughter. That's not— Elena started to protest, then stopped. You're right. That's exactly what I did. The admission hung between us, stark and undeniable. For a moment I felt something like relief. Finally, someone was acknowledging the truth. Did you ever love me? I asked. Even a little bit? Elena's face crumpled again. I tried to. God, Sarah. I tried so hard to love you the way you deserve, but every time I looked at you, I saw what I'd lost. I saw Kayla, and I saw James, and I saw all my mistakes staring back at me. What about David? Does he know? He knows something. He's always known something was wrong, but he's never asked the right questions. I think part of him doesn't want to know the truth, because the truth is that his wife cheated on him, and then made him raise another man's child. Elena nodded miserably. He's a good man, Sarah. He tried to love you, but you have to understand. You were a constant reminder of the worst thing I'd ever done. I was a child, I said, my voice breaking. I was an innocent child who deserved to be loved by the people who raised her. You're right. You're absolutely right. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I failed you in every way that mattered, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The apology I'd been waiting for my entire life, and it felt hollow. Too little, too late, wrapped in self-pity and excuses. What about James? I asked. Don't you think he deserved to know he had a daughter? Elena's expression hardened. James Sullivan was a mistake. A moment of weakness when David was working 18-hour days and I felt invisible in my own marriage. I ended it because I realized what I was throwing away. You were throwing away a man who actually wanted children. A man who would have loved me from the moment I was born. You don't know that. I do know that, I said firmly, because I met him. Because he told me that if he'd known about me, he would have moved mountains to be in my life. He's already more of a father to me than David ever was. Elena flinched as if I'd slapped her. Don't say that. David loves you. David loves the memory of a daughter who died before she could disappoint him. He's never loved me. I stood up, suddenly desperate to leave this house, this conversation, this entire toxic dynamic. But James does. James loves me exactly as I am, not as someone else I can never become. Where does this leave us? Elena asked quietly. I looked at this woman who'd given birth to me, raised me, lied to me for nearly 3 decades, who'd stolen my identity and my father and my chance at a real family, who'd loved me as much as she was capable of loving anyone, which wasn't nearly enough. I don't know, I said honestly. I need time to figure out who I am now that I know the truth, and I need you to tell David all of it. He deserves to know what he's been living with all these years. He'll leave me, maybe, or maybe he'll finally understand why his marriage has felt broken for 27 years. Elena nodded slowly, acceptance settling over her features. Will you keep in touch? Can we try to have some kind of relationship now that the truth is out? I thought about it, studying this broken woman who'd made such catastrophic choices out of fear and grief and selfishness. I'll try, I said finally, but things can't go back to how they were. I'm not going to pretend to be Kayla anymore, and I'm not going to keep begging for scraps of love from people who see me as a consolation prize. I understand. I'm changing my name legally to Sarah Sullivan, and I'm getting to know my real father, and if you can't handle that, then we don't have anything to build on. Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, there was something different in her expression, a resignation maybe, or the beginning of acceptance. Sarah Sullivan, she said, testing the name. It suits you better than Morrison ever did. It wasn't much. It wasn't forgiveness, or redemption, or the tearful reconciliation I'd secretly hoped for, but it was acknowledgement. It was the first time Elena had ever seemed to see me as myself, instead of as someone else. As Marcus and I drove back to Seattle, I felt something shifting inside me. Not closure. That would take years to achieve, if it ever came at all, but clarity. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was and exactly what I wanted. I was Sarah Sullivan, daughter of James Sullivan and Elena Morrison. I was a graphic designer and photographer who was engaged to a carpenter who loved her completely. I was someone who'd been lied to but had chosen truth, someone who'd been rejected but had found acceptance, someone who'd spent 27 years being the wrong person and was finally ready to be herself. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was real. And real, I was learning, was so much better than perfect. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, jarring me from the first peaceful sleep I'd had in weeks. I fumbled for my phone, expecting it to be Elena, or perhaps an emergency with Ruth's health. Instead, I saw James's name on the caller ID. James? Is everything wrong? Sarah. His voice was shaky, breathless. I need to tell you something. I should have told you when you were here, but I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to hurt you more than you'd already been hurt. I sat up in bed, Marcus stirring beside me. What are you talking about? There's someone else, someone you need to meet. My blood went cold. Another daughter? No, not another daughter. James took a deep breath. Sarah, your twin didn't die. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs, felt the room spin around me. What did you mean she didn't die? The hospital record Ruth showed you. It says baby A was deceased, baby B survived. But I've been doing some digging since you visited, calling in favors from old journalist contacts, and I found something. Marcus sat up beside me, instantly alert. I put the call on speaker with shaking hands. Tell me, I whispered. Baby A didn't die. She was severely premature, had complications, needed immediate specialized care that Portland General couldn't provide. She was transferred to OHSU that same night for emergency surgery, but the paperwork got confused in the chaos. Someone made a clerical error, marked her as deceased instead of transferred. That's impossible. It happened more than you'd think in the 90s, before electronic records, especially in complicated birth situations with multiple babies and emergency transfers. James's voice was gaining strength, the journalist in him taking over. Elena was sedated, grieving what she thought was a dead baby, dealing with her guilt over the affair. She never questioned the death certificate. Are you telling me that somewhere out there I have a living twin sister? Her name is Kayla Morrison. She was adopted by a family in Eugene when she was 6 months old, after it became clear that Elena and David weren't coming to claim her. The adoptive parents thought she'd been abandoned. I felt like I was drowning. How long have you known this? I started suspecting when you told me about the twins. Something about Elena's story didn't add up. She was so adamant that the baby was dead, but she'd never seen the body, never had a funeral. When people are lying, they often overcompensate with details that don't make sense. So you investigated my family without telling me. The betrayal hit almost as hard as the revelation, just like Marcus did. Sarah, where is she? I interrupted. Where is Kayla? Eugene. She's a pediatric nurse at Sacred Heart Medical Center. She goes by Kayla Andrews. Andrews was her adoptive family's name. And Sarah. James paused. She looks exactly like you. I was off the bed and pacing now, my mind reeling with implications. Have you contacted her? No. I wanted to talk to you first. But Sarah, there's something else. Something that makes this whole situation even more complicated. How could it possibly be more complicated? Kayla Andrews has been looking for her birth family for years. She hired a private investigator 6 months ago. She knows about Elena and David Morrison in Portland. She knows she had a twin who supposedly died at birth. The room tilted around me. She's been looking for us. She's been looking for you specifically. The PI found the falsified records, figured out that the baby who died was actually you. Kayla thinks you're her dead twin sister who somehow survived. Marcus was out of bed now too, rubbing my shoulders as I hyperventilated. This is insane, I gasped. This is absolutely insane. Sarah, breathe, James said through the phone. I know it's overwhelming, but overwhelming? I laughed, and it came out sharp and hysterical. James, I spent 27 years thinking I was someone else, then found out I was actually me. And now you're telling me the person I thought I was is actually someone else who's also me? How is that not completely fucking insane? Because now you can meet her, James said quietly. You can meet the sister you were born with, the person who shares your DNA, your story, your beginning. You can get answers to questions you didn't even know you had. I stopped pacing, the full weight of his words hitting me. Somewhere in Eugene, 2 hours south of Portland, was a woman who shared my face, my genetics, my origin story. A woman who'd been raised by strangers while I was raised by people who wished I was her. A woman who was also looking for the truth about where she came from. What's she like? I asked. I don't know much. Her social media is pretty locked down, but from what I could see, she seems kind, dedicated to her work. She volunteers with a children's literacy program. James paused. She has your smile. How can she have my smile if we've never met? Because it's not just your smile, Sarah. It's both of yours. You were born together. The concept was so foreign I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I'd spent my entire life feeling alone, feeling like an outsider, never quite fitting anywhere, and somewhere else, another woman with my face had been growing up feeling the same way. I want to meet her, I said suddenly, but not like this. Not with you telling me about her secondhand. Can you give me her number? Sarah, maybe you should think about this. Meeting her could complicate things even more than they already are. James, I took a deep breath, finding my center. I've spent my entire life having other people make decisions about what I could and couldn't handle. I'm not doing that anymore. Give me her number. There was a pause. Then James rattled off digits that I frantically wrote down. Her shift ends at 7 p.m. That might be the best time to call. Okay. I looked at the clock. 2:55 a.m. 16 hours to wait. 16 hours to figure out what to say to the sister I'd never known existed. After we hung up, Marcus and I sat in stunned silence in our darkened bedroom. How are you feeling? He asked finally. Like I'm living in someone else's life. Again, I stared at the phone number I'd scrawled on a napkin. What am I supposed to say to her? Hi, I'm your twin sister, but I've been living under your name for 27 years because our mother thought you were dead. You could start with hello. Despite everything, I smiled. Very helpful, thank you. Marcus pulled me back into bed, wrapping his arms around me. Whatever happens with Kayla, the real Kayla, we'll figure it out, just like we figured out everything else. What if she hates me? What if she blames me for the life she should have had? What if she doesn't? What if she's been feeling just as lost and disconnected as you have? The possibility hadn't occurred to me, but it made sense. If Kayla had been looking for her birth family, she probably felt the same sense of displacement I'd carried my whole life. Maybe we'd both been searching for the same thing, the missing piece that would make us feel complete. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Instead, I lay awake imagining conversations, rehearsing introductions, trying to picture a face that was supposedly identical to mine, but belonged to a stranger. By the time Marcus's alarm went off at 7, I'd already been up for hours researching everything I could find about Kayla Andrews. James was right. Her social media was locked down, but I found her professional profile on the hospital's website. The photo was small, professional, but unmistakably familiar. It was like looking at myself in scrubs, my hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, my eyes holding the same guarded expression I wore in professional photos. That's eerie, Marcus said, looking over my shoulder at the screen. That's my sister, I said, testing the words. They felt strange in my mouth. I'd never had a sibling, had never been anyone's sister. Now I was discovering I'd been someone's twin for 27 years without knowing it. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. I tried to work, but couldn't concentrate. I tried to eat, but my stomach was in knots. By 6:30 p.m., I was sitting by my phone like a teenager waiting for a call from a crush. At exactly 7:15, I dialed. The phone rang 3 times before a voice answered. My voice, but not quite. The same tone, the same cadence, but with a slight Oregon accent I'd never had. Hello? Is this Kayla Andrews? My voice came out as barely a whisper. Yes. Who's this? My name is Sarah Morrison, but until recently I thought my name was Kayla Morrison. I think you're my twin sister. Silence. Long, stretched silence that made me wonder if she'd hung up. I'm sorry, she said finally, her voice shaky. Could you repeat that? I know how this sounds. I know it's crazy, but I have reason to believe that we were born together in Portland on December 15th, 1996, and that you were transferred to OHSU that night due to complications. Everyone thought you died, but you didn't. You were adopted. More silence. Then, oh my God. I know you've been looking for your birth family. I know you hired a private investigator. How do you? She stopped, took a breath. Can you prove it? Can you prove we're related? I'd been prepared for this question. I can tell you that our birth mother is Elena Morrison, married to Dr. David Morrison of Portland. I can tell you that we were born at Portland General Hospital. I can tell you that our biological father is James Sullivan, a photographer who Elena had an affair with. I paused. And I can tell you that I look exactly like you. Jesus, she whispered. This is really happening. It's really happening. I have so many questions. I don't even know where to start. Her voice was getting stronger, more animated. Are you okay? Are you safe? The question caught me off guard. Am I safe? I mean, if you were raised by our birth parents and they thought I was dead, were they good to you? Did they love you? The simple concern in her voice, this immediate worry for my well-being from a complete stranger, made my throat tight. It's complicated. They tried to love me, but they were grieving you. They never really saw me as myself. They saw me as a replacement for the daughter they thought they'd lost. That's horrible. I'm so sorry. What about you? Your adoptive family, were they good to you? The best, she said immediately. Mom and Dad Andrews couldn't have kids, and they'd been waiting for years when I became available. They've been incredible parents. I couldn't have asked for better. I felt a stab of something. Envy, maybe, or grief for the childhood I could have had. Somewhere, a family had been waiting to love a child completely and unconditionally, and that child had been my sister instead of me. I'm glad, I said, and meant it. I'm glad you got the family you deserved. Can I see you? I mean, I know this is moving fast, but I've been looking for you my whole life. I always felt like there was someone missing. You felt it too. Of course I felt it. Didn't you? I thought about all the times I'd felt incomplete, like I was only half of something larger. I'd attributed it to my difficult relationship with Elena and David, but maybe it had been simpler than that. Maybe I'd been missing my other half. I felt it, I admitted. I want to meet you too. But Kayla, I need to warn you, this whole situation is really complicated. There are things about our birth family that you might not want to know. Like what? Like the fact that Elena and David Morrison are not good people. They're selfish and dishonest, and they've spent 27 years making me feel like I was defective for not being you. They made you feel defective for not being me, but I wasn't even there. That's what made it so impossible. You were perfect because you were absent. I was flawed because I was present and different from whoever they imagined you would have become. Kayla was quiet for a moment. That's the most fucked up thing I've ever heard. I laughed despite myself. Yeah, it really is. Well, she said, and I could hear a smile in her voice. They can't mess with both of us. No, I agreed. They can't. We talked for 2 more hours, comparing lives, sharing stories, marveling at the similarities in our personalities, despite our completely different upbringings. She was funnier than I'd expected, quicker to laugh, more optimistic, but underneath the differences, there was something fundamentally familiar about talking to her, like coming home to a place I'd never been. Can you come to Eugene this weekend? She asked, as we were winding down the call. I know it's a lot to ask, but yes, I said immediately. Yes, I'll come. I'll bring Marcus, my fiancé, if that's okay. Of course it's okay. I want to meet the man who's marrying my sister. My sister. The words made my chest warm in a way I'd never experienced before. Kayla, can I ask you something? Anything? Are you angry? About the mix-up? About being separated? About everything? She considered the question carefully. I'm angry at the system that let it happen. I'm angry at the people who were too careless or too overwhelmed to double-check their paperwork. But I'm not angry at you, and I'm not even really angry at Elena Morrison. She thought I was dead. Of course she didn't come looking for me. You're more generous than I am. Maybe. Or maybe I just got luckier with the family that raised me. Her voice grew serious. Sarah, I want you to know something. I know you've been through hell with this whole identity thing, and I know meeting me might complicate your life even more. But from my perspective, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I found my twin sister. I found the person I've been missing my whole life. After we hung up, I sat in my living room feeling like the world had shifted on its axis yet again. In the span of 2 weeks, I'd discovered my real name, met my biological father, confronted the woman who'd raised me, and now found the sister I'd never known existed. How do you feel? Marcus asked, settling beside me on the couch, like I'm finally becoming a real person instead of someone's projection. I leaned into his warmth. She wants to meet this weekend. Then we'll go to Eugene. Just like that? Just like that. Marcus kissed the top of my head. Besides, I'm curious to meet the woman who got the life you were supposed to have. I want to see if she turned out as amazing as you did. On Saturday morning, we drove south to Eugene to meet my sister, my twin, the other half of myself I'd been missing for 27 years without knowing it. For the first time since this whole journey began, I felt like I was driving towards something instead of away from it. Kayla Andrews was waiting in the lobby of a coffee shop near the University of Oregon campus when Marcus and I arrived Saturday afternoon. I spotted her immediately. It was like looking in a mirror, if mirrors could show you a version of yourself who'd grown up loved and confident. She stood up as we approached, her movements uncertain, and for a moment we just stared at each other. The resemblance was uncanny, but not exact. She was maybe an inch taller, her hair a shade lighter, her face slightly rounder from what looked like a lifetime of genuine smiles, but the bone structure, the eyes, the way she tilted her head, it was undeniably me, or rather us. Sarah, she said softly. Kayla. And then, without any awkward hesitation, she stepped forward and hugged me. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, like coming home to a place I'd never been, but had always belonged. You're real, she whispered against my shoulder. I was half convinced I'd dreamed our phone conversation. I'm real. We're real. I pulled back to look at her again. This is so strange. Strange good or strange bad? Strange wonderful. Marcus cleared his throat gently, and I realized I'd forgotten he was there. Kayla, this is Marcus. Marcus, this is my sister. The words felt foreign but right. Kayla shook his hand with a warm smile. Thank you for bringing her. And congratulations on the engagement. Sarah told me you proposed just a few weeks before all this craziness started. Best timing ever, Marcus said dryly, making Kayla laugh. I like him already, she told me. We found a corner table and ordered coffee, though I was too wired to need caffeine. Being near Kayla felt electric, like standing next to a generator. Every gesture she made, every expression that crossed her face, was familiar yet foreign. I have about 1,000,000 questions, she said, settling into her chair. But first, I need to know, are you okay? Really okay? Because from what you told me about our birth parents, it sounds like you had a rough time growing up. The concern in her voice was immediate and genuine. She'd known me for 24 hours and was already more worried about my well-being than Elena and David had ever been. I'm okay now, I said, but it was hard, really hard. They never quite knew what to do with me, because they thought I was dead, because they thought you were perfect and I wasn't you. I stirred my coffee absently. What was it like for you? Growing up adopted, I mean. Kayla's face lit up. Amazing. My parents, Mom and Dad Andrews, they tried for years to have kids. They were so grateful when I came into their lives. They never let me forget how wanted I was. They told me I was adopted from the beginning, made it clear that my birth parents hadn't abandoned me, but had lost me through circumstances beyond their control. They sound incredible. They are. They're actually here, in town. They drove down from Portland. Yes, we ended up in Portland too. Different side of the city from the Morrisons, because they wanted to meet you. She paused, studying my face. If you're up for it. I know it's a lot. The idea of meeting parents who'd actually wanted their child, who'd chosen to love her completely, was both terrifying and appealing. I'd like that. Good, because I already invited them to dinner. Kayla grinned, and it was my grin, but brighter, more confident. I hope you don't mind me being presumptuous, but I figured we should all meet the people who matter to each other. Over the next hour, Kayla told me about her life, growing up in a loving home, excelling in school, choosing nursing because she wanted to help children. She'd always felt like something was missing, she said, but had attributed it to normal adoptee feelings, rather than specifically missing a twin. I used to talk to myself as a kid, she admitted. Long conversations, like I was talking to another person. My parents thought I had an imaginary friend, but it never felt imaginary. It felt like I was talking to someone real, who just wasn't there. I did the same thing, I said, amazed. I'd lie in bed at night having these elaborate conversations with someone I couldn't see. Elena thought I was weird. Not weird, just talking to your sister. The concept gave me chills. All those nights I'd felt crazy for talking to myself. I'd actually been trying to reach the other half of my soul. Marcus had been listening to our conversation with fascination. This is incredible, he said. It's like you've been connected this whole time without knowing it. What about boyfriends? I asked Kayla. Dating? Relationships? She laughed. A disaster mostly. I kept feeling like no one really understood me, like they were only seeing half of who I was. I actually broke up with a really great guy last year because I told him I felt incomplete, and he took it personally. Oh my God, I did the same thing. I sabotaged so many relationships because I felt like I was lying about who I was, even though I didn't know why. And now, I looked at Marcus, this man who'd somehow seen through my confusion to the real person underneath. Marcus is different. He fell in love with me despite my family, not because of them. He saw me as myself, not as someone I was trying to be. That's because he's actually seeing you, Kayla said. The real you, not the version of you that was trying to be me. Dinner was at a small Italian restaurant where Kayla's adoptive parents, Robert and Linda Andrews, were waiting for us. They were in their 60s, both teachers, with kind eyes and genuine warmth that I'd never experienced from parental figures. Linda Andrews took one look at me and burst into tears. Oh, honey, she said, standing to hug me. Look at you. You're Kayla's twin, all right, but you look so sad. The observation, delivered with such gentle compassion, almost broke me. This woman had known me for 30 seconds and could see what Elena had missed for 27 years. I'm getting better, I managed. Of course you are. You found each other. Robert Andrews shook my hand, then pulled me into a hug too. We've been praying for this day since Kayla was old enough to ask about her birth family. You have? Every parent wants their child to know where they come from, Linda said. We always hoped someday Kayla would find her roots. We just never imagined she'd find a twin sister. Dinner was a revelation. The Andrews treated me like family from the moment I sat down, asking about my work, my relationship with Marcus, my hopes and dreams. They listened when I mentioned my difficult relationship with Elena and David, without judgment or attempts to minimize my experience. Some people aren't meant to be parents, Robert said quietly when I described growing up feeling like a disappointment. That doesn't reflect on you at all. But they tried, I said, feeling compelled to defend Elena and David despite everything. everything. They kept me, they fed me, they sent me to college. Honey, Linda interrupted gently, keeping a child fed and housed is the bare minimum. Love isn't just about providing the basics. It's about seeing your child for who they are and celebrating that person, like you did with Kayla, like we tried to do, like any parent should do. Linda reached across the table to squeeze my hand, and like you'll do with your own children someday. The conversation shifted to lighter topics. Marcus's carpentry work, Kayla's patients at the hospital, the Andrews' recent retirement, but I found myself studying this family dynamic, marveling at how natural and warm it felt. No one was performing for anyone else. No one was trying to live up to impossible expectations. They just enjoyed being together. Can I ask you something? I said to Kayla as dessert arrived. Of course. Are you angry that I got to be raised by our birth parents while you were given away? Kayla considered the question seriously. I was, initially. When I first started looking for my birth family, I felt bitter about being the one who was abandoned, even though I knew it wasn't really abandonment. But now, having met you and heard your story, she shook her head. Sarah, I got the better deal. I got parents who chose me, who wanted me exactly as I was. You got parents who were grieving someone else and could never figure out how to love you properly. If anything, I should feel guilty. Don't, I said firmly. Don't feel guilty for getting the love I should have had. I'm glad you had it. Really, maybe we can share it now, Linda suggested. You're Kayla's sister, which makes you our honorary daughter too, if you want. The offer was so unexpected, so generous that I couldn't speak for a moment. Marcus squeezed my hand under the table. I'd like that, I whispered. After dinner, Kayla and I walked around downtown Eugene while Marcus and the Andrews got better acquainted. The evening was warm, and the streets were full of college students and families enjoying the weekend. I need to tell you something, Kayla said, as we stopped by a fountain in a small park. I've been thinking about it all day. Okay, I want to meet them. Elena and David Morrison, our birth parents. My stomach clenched. Kayla, I don't think that's a good idea. They're not good people. Maybe not, but they're still our biological parents, and they've been living with this lie for 27 years. Don't you think it's time someone forced them to face the truth? What truth? That their real daughter didn't die? That they've been raising the wrong twin this whole time? That's going to destroy them. Maybe they need to be destroyed, Kayla said, her voice harder than I'd heard it before. Maybe they need to understand the damage they've done by perpetuating this lie. They didn't know you were alive. They didn't bother to find out, Kayla interrupted. Sarah, think about it. Their baby was supposedly dead, but they never saw the body, never had a funeral, never questioned why the paperwork was so rushed and confusing. Come on. They didn't want to know the truth because the lie was more convenient. The possibility had never occurred to me, but as soon as Kayla said it, I knew she was right. Elena and David had accepted the death certificate because it solved their problem. It eliminated the evidence of Elena's affair and gave them a clean slate with a new baby who looked enough like their dead daughter to maintain the fiction. You think they suspected. I think they chose not to ask questions that might complicate their lives, and as a result, I grew up without my biological family, and you grew up feeling like a stranger in your own home. We sat on a bench facing the fountain, two identical women with completely different histories, trying to make sense of the choices that had shaped our lives. What do you want to do? I asked. I want to confront them. I want them to look at both of us together and explain how they could live with themselves all these years. Kayla turned to me, her expression fierce. But I won't do it without you. We were separated once by their lies. I won't let them divide us again. I thought about Elena and David, living their comfortable life in Portland, probably relieved that they'd avoided my engagement dinner and the uncomfortable reminders of their deception. They thought they were safe in their lie, that the truth would stay buried forever. Okay, I said, let's do it. But I want James there too. And Marcus. And your parents if they're willing. I want them to see what a real family looks like. Kayla smiled, and it was fierce and beautiful, and exactly like my own. Now you're talking. When? Next weekend. I'll call them tomorrow and tell them I'm their daughter. Their real daughter. The one they thought was dead. Her eyes glittered with something that might have been anticipation or revenge. I have a feeling it's going to be a very interesting conversation. As we walked back to meet Marcus and the Andrews, I felt something settling into place inside me. For 27 years, I'd been alone in dealing with Elena and David's dysfunction. But now I had Kayla, my twin, my other half, my sister, who understood exactly what it felt like to be shaped by their choices. Together, we were going to force them to face the truth they'd been running from for nearly 3 decades. And maybe, finally, we could all stop living the lie they'd created and start living as ourselves. The Morrison house looked smaller than I remembered as we pulled into the driveway on Sunday afternoon. Behind us, James parked his truck, and behind him, Robert and Linda Andrews arrived in their sensible Honda. It felt like bringing an army to a negotiation, but after 27 years of feeling outnumbered in this house, I wanted the support. Kayla sat in the passenger seat of our car, staring at the house house where she should have grown up. She'd been quiet during the drive from Eugene, her usual confidence replaced by something I recognized, the nervous energy that came from finally confronting the people who'd shaped your life through their absence. "You ready for this?" I asked her. "Are you?" "No, but let's do it anyway." Elena opened the door before we could knock, and the look on her face when she saw Kayla was everything I'd expected and more. The color drained from her cheeks, her hand flew to her throat, and for a moment I thought she might collapse. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Hello, Elena," Kayla said, her voice steady and cold. "I'm Kayla Morrison, your daughter, the one you thought was dead." But you can't be," the hospital said. Elena's eyes darted between Kayla and me, taking in our identical features, our similar bone structure, the undeniable proof that we were twins. "How is this possible?" "Clerical error," I said. "She was transferred to OHSU for emergency surgery, but someone marked her as deceased instead of transferred. She was adopted 6 months later by people who actually wanted a daughter." Elena stepped back as our group filed into her house. Kayla and me, Marcus, James, and the Andrews. David appeared from the living room, took one look at the assembled crowd, and sank heavily into his recliner. "I don't understand," he said. "Kayla, why are all these people here? And who?" His voice trailed off as he really looked at my sister for the first time. "Jesus Christ. That's one way to put it," Kayla said dryly. We arranged ourselves in the living room like opposing armies. Elena and David on one side, looking stunned and trapped. The rest of us on the other side, united in our demand for truth and accountability. "I think some introductions are in order," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "David, Elena, this is Kayla Andrews, your biological daughter who didn't die 27 years ago. These are her parents, Robert and Linda Andrews, who raised her with actual love and support. You remember James Sullivan, my biological father, the man whose existence you've been hiding from me my entire life." Elena was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. "Kayla, I'm so sorry. We thought you were dead. We would never have if we'd known." "Bullshit," Kayla said quietly. "You never saw my body. You never had a funeral. You never questioned paperwork that was clearly rushed and confused. You accepted the death certificate because it was convenient. That's not true." "It is true," James interrupted. "I've seen the original hospital records, Elena. The ones that show baby A was transferred, not deceased. The ones that mention genetic testing because Sarah looked different from David. You had plenty of reasons to ask questions, but you chose not to. David looked like he was aging in real time." "Genetic testing?" "Elena had an affair," I said bluntly. "With James. I'm his daughter biologically, not yours. You spent 27 years trying to love a child who wasn't even yours while your actual daughter was growing up with strangers." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena's tears came harder, and David stared at his hands as if they held answers to questions he'd never wanted to ask. "I loved you," David said quietly, looking at me. "I tried to love you like my own daughter, but I never felt like your own daughter," I replied. "I felt like a consolation prize, like someone you were stuck with but could never quite accept, because you weren't Kayla," Elena said through her tears. "You weren't the daughter we lost. You were different, and we didn't know why. And every day you reminded us of what we'd given up." "I wasn't what you'd given up," I said, my voice rising. "I was what you had, and Kayla wasn't dead. She was what you actually gave up. You gave up your real daughter for a lie." Linda Andrews had been listening to this exchange with growing horror. "How could you?" she asked Elena. "How could you live with yourselves, knowing you'd abandoned one child and were treating the other like a burden?" "We didn't abandon anyone," David said defensively. "We kept Sarah. We raised her. We gave her everything. You gave her food and shelter." Robert Andrews cut him off. "That's not the same as giving her love. That's not the same as making her feel wanted. And you gave her a dead child's identity," Kayla added. "You made her live someone else's life because you couldn't face the truth about your own choices." Elena looked up from her tears, focusing on Kayla with desperate intensity. "Can you forgive us? Can either of you forgive us? We were young. We were scared. We made terrible decisions, but we never meant—" "Stop," Kayla said firmly. "Don't make this about your guilt. Don't make this about what you meant or didn't mean. This is about what you did. You separated twins. You lied about a child's identity. You kept a father from his daughter. You raised one child while rejecting her for not being someone else. Those are your choices, and they have consequences." "What consequences?" David asked quietly. Kayla and I looked at each other, and I saw my own resolve reflected in her eyes. "You don't get to be our parents anymore," I said. "Either of us. We're done pretending we're a family." "But Sarah—" "My name isn't Sarah Morrison," I interrupted. "It's Sarah Sullivan. I'm changing it legally. And Kayla is Kayla Andrews. She has parents who actually chose her and love her unconditionally." "What about us?" Elena asked desperately. "What about the relationship we have?" "We don't have a relationship," Kayla said. "We have a history of lies and abandonment and emotional damage. That's not the same thing." James had been listening to all of this with a mixture of sadness and anger. "Elena," he said finally, "I want you to understand what you stole from me. I wanted children more than anything in the world. If you told me about Sarah, I would have moved to Portland. I would have done everything in my power to be a good father to her. Instead, you let me spend 27 years thinking I was childless while my daughter grew up feeling unloved. I couldn't. The scandal, David's career. You put your reputation above your daughter's well-being," James said simply. "Both daughters' well-being. That's a choice you'll have to live with." Elena turned to me one more time, her eyes pleading. "Sarah, please. I know I failed you. I know I wasn't wasn't the mother you deserved. But can't we try again? Can't we start over now that the truth is out? I looked at this woman who'd given birth to me, who'd fed me and housed me and sent me to college, who'd also lied to me for 27 years and made me feel like a mistake every day of my life. I thought about all the birthdays she'd missed, all the achievements she'd dismissed, all the times I'd begged for her approval and been met with distant disappointment. No, I said finally, we can't start over. You had 27 years to love me as I was instead of grieving someone else. You chose grief. I'm choosing to move forward without you. Both of us are, Kayla added, taking my hand. We found each other despite your lies. We found real families who accept us completely. We don't need you anymore. The finality in her voice seemed to break something in Elena. She sobbed openly, her careful composure completely gone. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I know you are, I said, and I meant it. But sorry doesn't undo 27 years of damage. Sorry doesn't give me back my childhood or give Kayla back her birth family or give James back his chance to be a real father from the beginning. Marcus, who'd been quiet through most of this confrontation, spoke up. We should go. He was right. There was nothing more to say, nothing more to resolve. Elena and David would have to live with the consequences of their choices, and Kayla and I would build our lives around the family we'd found and chosen. As we prepared to leave, David called my name one more time. Sarah, I turned back. For what it's worth, I did love you. Maybe not the way you needed, maybe not enough, but I did love you. I studied his face. This man who'd tried to be my father despite never quite knowing how. I know, I said, and I loved you too. But love isn't enough when it's conditional. Love isn't enough when it requires someone to be someone else. I understand. I hope you do. I hope you both figure out how to live with the truth now that it's out. In the driveway, our chosen family regrouped. James hugged me tightly, and I could feel his tears on my shoulder. I'm proud of you, he whispered. Both of you. You handled that with more grace than they deserved. What happens now? Linda Andrews asked. I looked around at this group of people. My biological father, my twin sister, her adoptive parents, my fiancé, who'd come together to support me in confronting the lies that had shaped my life. Now we go home, I said. All of us. To the families we've chosen and the people who love us as we are. Kayla squeezed my hand. Together. 6 months later, Marcus and I were married in James's backyard overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Kayla was my maid of honor. James walked me down the aisle, and Robert and Linda Andrews sat in the front row with tears in their eyes. The ceremony was small, intimate, filled with people who'd chosen to love us rather than people who felt obligated to tolerate us. Elena and David weren't invited. Ruth had passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 months earlier, taking the last of the old secrets with her. We honored her memory with a moment of silence for the woman who'd finally chosen truth over comfort. During our first dance, Marcus spun me around so I could see all our guests. James taking photos, Kayla laughing with her parents, friends from Seattle and Mendocino, and Eugene all mingling together. How does it feel? He asked. To be Sarah Sullivan? I thought about it, looking around at this life I'd built from scratch, after learning everything I'd believed about myself was a lie. It feels like coming home, I said, and for the first time, as the sun dipped lower behind the horizon, the sisters walked side by side, their footsteps echoing softly along the quiet street. For the first time, Sarah no longer felt the weight of uncertainty pressing on her chest. Instead, there was a fragile but undeniable sense of hope, an open road ahead where healing and trust could finally take root. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and Kayla met often, sharing childhood stories, dreams, and even the silence that only sisters could understand. James joined them sometimes, his eyes reflecting both pride and regret, as if he too had been given a second chance at fatherhood. Those scars from the past would never fully vanish. They began weaving a new tapestry of family, thread by thread, moment by moment. On a quiet evening months later, Sarah looked across the table at her mother, Elena, who had finally gathered the courage to face them all. The air was tense, fragile, but different this time. No longer poisoned by lies, but softened by the first fragile steps toward forgiveness. And as Sarah clasped Kayla's hand beneath the table, she knew their story had not ended with loss. It had only just begun, with truth, with love, and with the unbreakable bond of family finally restored.